Can you just put your hand on the camera? Just follow you now. Ah, perfect.
Okay.
All right. Stand here because the camera tends to light me. So
Okay.
it's not following me. This at least happens in the other class. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute pleasure having you here with us. So glad you could join us. This is Khurram. I represent Strathclyde University. I'm the program coordinator handling the Masters in Strategic FinTech program. And tonight we're gathered here for this gentleman over here, whom I'm going to introduce, and we're going to get right into it. There will be a question and answer session at the end of it. So you're more than welcome to reserve your questions at the end, and then we'll come towards you. Just raise your hand. A typical question and answer session, right? There is some tea and coffee and water, just in case you missed it. And there are beautiful views, but they're behind you, so you can enjoy them after the session, right? Lovely. In front of you, it's about you. Mark Cummins is a professor of financial technology at the Strathclyde Business School. Before that, he was at the Dublin University and the director of Irish Institute of Digital Business. At Strathclyde currently, he leads the FinTech cluster. He holds a PhD in quantitative finance, and he has produced extensive research amounting up to 50 publication outputs. Mark Cummins' interest goes into strategically important and cross-cutting areas of sustainable finance and financial technology. He's come all the way from Glasgow here for you, for us, and for the strategic FinTech students as well. And now let's welcome him for the topic of lifting the lid on black box, explainable artificial intelligence and opportunities in finance, Mark Cummins.
Thank you, Khurram. Really appreciate that, and Elvin as well. Appreciate the work and effort that's been put into setting up the talk today. And I'd like to thank everybody here for coming to listen to me speak about this topic around explainable artificial intelligence, which I think is of interest to people from a number of different backgrounds and for a number of different reasons, which we'll talk about later. Again, I'm very pleased to be here. I've joined Strathclyde as of September. And I've built up a kind of a track record of publications in this space, with interest across a number of different areas like crowdfunding, invoice exchange trading, cybersecurity risk and the impact of corporations, but also then from the artificial intelligence perspective, but primarily around this explainable artificial intelligence concept. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background to, again, a little bit more of myself, but also the role that I play in Strathclyde, before we get on to talking around the topic of explainable AI and the opportunities in finance. So, as I said, I've come in the role of Professor of Financial Technology. Part of that role is to lead up one of the university's strategic research clusters, which is FinTech, Financial Technology. And you can see that within Strathclyde, there are 5 other strategic clusters that operate within the university. So we have communications, we have space, quantum, industrial informatics, and health tech are the 4 other clusters. Now the clusters again are university-wide. So the objective and the role that I play is to try and coordinate the activities that are FinTech related. So this goes beyond the business school. It goes right into, again, the STEM side of the university. And again, we're exploring opportunities in which these different clusters can collaborate with one another. So I'm doing a lot of work around space and quantum in particular at the moment. Oh, great. That's great. Thanks. That's great. Thank you. So the objective is to try and coordinate this activity, okay, across the university, but also to coordinate activity on an outreach basis externally for the university. So Strathclyde is a university that is premised on the idea that we need to be connected with enterprise, okay, so it's the place of use for learning, and we need to be connected with enterprise, and that's a big tenet of the University of Strathclyde, and it's one of the unique selling points of it as an institution within the Scottish framework, but also within the United Kingdom framework more generally. And so with that in mind, we work as a cluster very closely with FinTech Scotland. So FinTech Scotland is a cluster entity which manages the FinTech ecosystem from across Scotland, okay, and looks obviously to outreach beyond Scotland into the wider United Kingdom, but also internationally as well. So FinTech Scotland is a strategic partner of ours. So in terms of our cluster is focused on that research and innovation and outreach to industry. FinTech Scotland again coordinates the FinTech ecosystem in its entirety, and that's a really fledgling and growing ecosystem. Something like 211 FinTech companies now currently operating within Scotland, and that's across a range of different activities. Okay, so I know there's a very vibrant ecosystem, FinTech ecosystem we're in, and I think in Scotland as well. So again, I think there's a lot of synergies in a sense between what Scotland is looking to achieve and also in terms of what Bahrain is trying to achieve here. I suppose in terms of that relationship with FinTech Scotland, they published a roadmap about 12 months ago, roughly. And within that roadmap, they kind of mapped out the kind of critical areas that will be targeted over months and years as we move in to this kind of growth phase of FinTech within the Scottish landscape. You can see the areas that are identified there. Probably no major surprises for anybody who's familiar with FinTech and familiar with kind of the developments. But clearly you'll see financial regulation, climate finance, open finance, and actually open finance is the topic of what we will discuss with the MSc in Strategic FinTech for this weekend. So I'm here to teach on that MSc in FinTech Strategic FinTech program. I'll be teaching the Future of FinTech program over Friday and Saturday of this week. And open banking and open finance is going to be the particular topic there, with a view to looking at those future trends and what are those opportunities there. So in the context of open finance, obviously Scotland has also identified this as an opportunity for its ecosystem. And again, there's various things that we're kind of doing in that space. And then payments and transactions is the area that we've identified. And within that roadmap, there's again subcategories, and within that again further discussions around opportunities that present themselves for Scotland. And you know, it's great to have an entity like FinTech Scotland, which is working to coordinate that activity right across Scotland, and again with that reach into the United Kingdom and beyond as well. So that's a little bit of context. So that's the kind of role that I play. Okay, so that's the role that I play within Strathclyde. Okay, so again, Professor of Technology, leading the FinTech cluster, and again interacting and connecting into this wider ecosystem within Scotland. In terms of what we're planning to do, or that we do, or plan to do within the FinTech cluster, there's a number of different areas that we have focused on. And again, you can see how these mapped that roadmap that I mentioned that FinTech Scotland have produced. So we are focusing on financial regulation, we're focusing on climate finance, we're focusing on alternative investment, we're focusing on open banking and open finance. And the last kind of area that we're going to focus on is around model risk and governance. And that topic area really connects to this idea of explainable artificial intelligence. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Okay. So these are the focus areas. In terms of what we do, in terms of cross-cutting, say, analytical components, explainable AI is, again, a capacity that we're looking to build within Strathclyde, within the FinTech cluster. There is activity in terms of this area in the STEM side of the university, looking at industrial informatics applications, looking at computer science applications, and what I'm trying to drive from the cluster point of view are applications in terms of financial services and finance more broadly. So again, that's a capacity that we'll be building over the next number of years. We also have kind of competency around textual analysis and audio analysis, and how you can integrate those two. Okay. And again, we'll be looking to feed some of that into the explainable AI approaches, and I'll talk about some work that we're planning to do over the coming period of time. And then in terms of other areas, kind of cross-cutting areas, we have a big competency in the area of entrepreneurship, both from a research point of view, but also kind of industry connection point of view. And then we have a strong competency in the management science space, where we look at operational risk, integration, and resilience topics. Okay. So in terms of what we do, it's quite broad. Again, it is to try and connect with industry, with the financial services sector, with the fintech sector, but it's also to reach across again and connect with our other clusters, which I mentioned at the beginning, and also those associated sectors. So if I just move on to our kind of cross-cluster collaborations, and this is the thing that really excites me, and it's part of the reason I took on the position with Strathclyde, is again the strategic priority that is given to some of these areas. So the opportunity to kind of reach across and work with colleagues within the University of Strathclyde and some of these areas is very, very exciting. It presents a huge amount of opportunities, and I've had some very interesting discussions about where some of this might go. So in terms of three of the clusters, which I'll just point out, so again, if you go back to my earlier slide, you see the clusters as they are outlined. One of them is quantum, and we have a very strong quantum computing and quantum timing-based unit in the University of Strathclyde. And so they actually are very strong both on the hardware perspective, but also on the software perspective. We're looking at opportunities for cross-collaboration, particularly looking at kind of optimization problems in finance, where quantum computing could play a role. Another exciting kind of cross-collaboration is with the space cluster. And again, there are huge opportunities in finance here for use of Earth observation data and what we call Earth intelligence, which is AI augmented use of Earth observation data. So this is really just how we can use satellite imaging data, for example, to augment our understanding of various problems in finance. Okay, so whether it's risk management, for example, we could be trying to assess the kind of environmental risks that you may face in the portfolio by understanding and processing this kind of Earth observation data. Okay, and we know information is king, and so again, this is a kind of exciting opportunity for us. And in terms of industrial informatics, explainable AI again is a competency within this cluster. It's something that they have developed and applied for quite a considerable period of time. But what they focus on, particularly in different sectors to financial services, is AI deployment. So AI system deployment and how you can optimize that organization. So how do you articulate the value proposition? How does that work when you've got a heavily regulated environment? And how do you explain and communicate what these AI systems are doing? Okay. But a specific focus area for industrial informatics is around nuclear energy. But if you look at financial services, it has a lot of these similar properties. Financial services are trying to understand the value proposition with AI systems. They are very heavily regulated environments. Okay. And there is a need to communicate what these AI systems are doing, not just internally, but also externally, because regulators and supervisors require us to be able to control and manage these AI systems that are being applied. There's a much bigger focus on that. You can see when you look at the discourse from a regulatory perspective. So So I suppose before I get into the explain about AI, I wanted to kind of give that bit of context that while fintech is a strategic focus of the university, and rightly so, and it is up there as one of the clusters, there's this kind of ecosystem within the university, and there's a big drive to kind of drive these collaborations between those clusters, because this is where the future of finance really kind of sits, I think. Okay? It's really at those intersections between those interdisciplinary areas, that's where the opportunities are. And from an academic perspective, but also from a business perspective, but certainly from an academic perspective, lots of really interesting problems that can be looked at. And we know that with that type of fundamental research, the idea is to move that forward towards translational research, which has an impact for industry. So that's again a big focus for Strathclyde. Okay, I'll probably skip this a little bit, but just in terms of the cluster, we're doing a lot of funding pursuits at the moment, so trying to raise funding that's going to deliver the capacity into us in terms of PhD students, postdoctoral researchers, who will hopefully work on a lot of these interesting ideas. And we're going to come back to these two funding opportunities, which are highlighted here, to explain some of the projects that we're looking at and we're explaining about AI fits into those. Okay. Okay, so if we start off with artificial intelligence, my disclaimer, despite the fact that I'm here talking about artificial intelligence and explainable artificial intelligence, is that I'm not an AI expert. Okay, so my background is in financial mathematics, option pricing, okay, and derivatives markets. But as a mathematician and statistician, I do understand the opportunity that lies with explainable AI. Okay, and luckily, I don't need to be necessarily a machine learning AI expert, because we have loads of competency within the university that can do that. And again, these funding opportunities I mentioned earlier are going to bring that capacity into it. Okay, so I'm much more interested in what are the opportunities, because I have a background which I'll come to later, which is kind of motivated me to look at explainable AI as an opportunity. So just that, obviously there's a mix of the audience here, so not sure what the different backgrounds are. Maybe people here I know who have machine learning expertise, others who may not. So it's worth just giving a quick overview of that landscape. What are the opportunities in finance that we see currently? Okay? And what are the pitfalls with current kind of approaches, and why would explainable AI offer value in any way, shape, or form? Okay. So if we look at AI, generally speaking, we know that AI is obviously being rolled out across the board. If you look at any business nowadays, there is some AI application. For finance, it's no different. Okay. But when you think about AI and machine learning, often again they're used interchangeably. Okay. But of course, there is a slight difference in those. Okay. So from the OECD, in fact, from this HackerMoon 2020 paper, really machine learning is a subset of AI. Neural networks are category of machine learning, and within that, then deep learning are a subcategory. And deep learning is getting a lot of attention recently, primarily due to the kind of improvements in accuracy that these types of techniques offer. They're highly complicated, and I'm not a deep learning expert, but I speak to people who are deep learning experts, and it is fascinating what is being done in this space. But one thing that we know about deep learning is that they get extremely complicated. Okay? So while you may get better accuracy from deep learning techniques, for example, if you want to drill into why a particular decision was made, that's almost impossible. Okay? So again, that presents a problem. So if you're only looking for accuracy, well, that's great, that's perfect, so you don't have to worry. If you have to give explainability, which you do, if you think about a bank, for example, that maybe is using some AI approaches to make lending decisions, if it rejects a particular application because the AI model says to reject it, but it can't explain that to the customer. Okay? So this is why explainability is becoming more important. And again, there's other reasons as to why that is important. But so just to kind of, I suppose, emphasize that a lot of things, there is a difference between these different areas. The other thing to mention as well is that while machine learning is the kind of key phrase now, there's a lot of statisticians who would say actually a lot of what you talk about is just it's been well established. Like Bayesian techniques are now referred to as machine learning techniques, but Bayesian techniques have been around for a long time. linear regression is a machine learning technique, but linear regression has been around for a long time. So you've got to, just be aware of where I suppose it fits in terms of that wider statistical framework. But what we have seen is that there has been significant advances made in terms of the ability to process large volumes of data and in the way in which these models are designed. And we do see this kind of move towards deep learning. But as I said, in terms of explainability, we're going the wrong direction with deep learning. Definitely get better predictions, but we're disimproving the opportunity to explain what's actually happening. Okay, so that's the kind of context. Okay, so we know again, these techniques are out there. From a finance perspective, yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is sorry. Actually, that sounds a lot better. Okay, so hopefully people can hear me a bit better there. Okay, it wasn't just my voice; it was the microphone. In terms of the application of AI in finance, really probably have 100 slides here. I'm sure we can start to drill down. But in terms of where we see a lot of the applications, we have asset management areas where it's applied. In terms of, again, trying to understand relationships to drive portfolio construction and portfolio management decisions. Credit intermediation is definitely a key one. In terms of, again, processing large volumes of data in order to make better credit decisions. Because we know there's an information asymmetry that exists. So the more data you can process, the better you'll be able to break down that information asymmetry. Algorithmic trading, again, with the emergence of high-frequency trading, AI provides a real opportunity to, again, process different types of information to inform these type of high-frequency trading algorithms. And then, of course, we see this kind of blockchain-based finance, which is emerging, particularly around decentralized finance. And again, AI has a potential role to play there. So again, AI has been applied in lots of different scenarios, but across these different scenarios, there are different requirements around this idea of explainability. So some scenarios may not even require explainability. There are definitely scenarios where explainability is really important. Okay, and to some extent, it comes down to some of the materiality of what you're doing. Okay, so if I'm using an AI model, for example, to drive a trading strategy, I want to know why it's making certain decisions. Okay? If it's driving credit decisions, where again, as an institution, we may get sued by people who feel that they were prejudiced against because of an AI system. Again, I want to be able to understand what's involved there. If it's just predicting oil prices to maybe feed into some kind of treasury analysis, well, then maybe it's not such a big deal. So again, it depends on what the application is, and that very much comes down to the materiality of the problem. Okay, and it also depends as well in terms of where you are, whether you're front office, middle office, or back office. So again, the level of explainability will depend on where that function is. Okay, so let's say if you're front office, and it's very much like trading orientated, things like robo-advisors, which are very, very prominent now. Again, explainability is likely to be very, very important there. But you could possibly say that it becomes less important as you move back towards middle office and back towards back office. But again, there are certain scenarios where explainability is going to be very important. And it's not just necessarily from the materiality point of view, but just from the business opportunities. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. Okay, so in terms of the risks, this OECD report that I cited at the beginning, so again, these are from this OECD report, and they talk about some of the risks and issues, okay? And two things that they talk about here, which I just want to highlight, which I'm going to come back to talk about a little bit later, is the issue of governance and accountability, okay? And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the idea of model governance, and it's an area that I've worked in myself, okay? And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But that's a really kind of key thing, and this is a key thing for the organization, but more importantly for regulators and supervisors who are looking over the financial system. And you can see the way in which the OECD in this graphic has actually explicitly called out explainability as one of the key issues that needs to be addressed in relation to AI systems. So these are kind of intimately linked in a sense. Okay, so to have a good governance structure over AI systems means to some extent you have to have the levels of explainability integrated in. Okay, now again, the degree to which things need to be explainable, as I mentioned, is driven by what the application is, and how material that is, and so on. But again, it's important to see that this is very much on the radar. So again, this is an OECD report, but if you look at any of the policy reports or policy kind of directives from the EU, from the United Kingdom, in the US, whatever, you'll see these kind of things emerging. The Federal Reserve are talking a lot around this issue of the black box nature of AI systems. So in terms of the black box nature of things, I want to talk a little bit about model risk management broadly. So this is actually an area that I've worked in myself for a period of time. So I worked with BP, the oil major, in this area, based in London, in Canary Wharf. And BP had a trading and supply division, okay, where all these trading activities happened. And effectively, that body was responsible for managing the risks associated with various physical operations of BP. Okay, and so it was a trading arm of BP. And within the various pillars of risk that they had, which are again standard ones: market risk, credit risk, operational risk, they actually had a dedicated unit for model risk, and I was part of that team. Now, model risk management is again not new, but it's relatively new. And the idea is that with any model that's used within an organization, there is a requirement to be able to manage and control the risks associated with that model. Okay, particularly when that model potentially feeds into other models, which potentially feed into decisions that be made by the organization. Okay, so when we talk about models, we're talking about really any mathematical models used within an organization, statistical models used, price curve models that might be used. And the idea again is that you need to be able to validate and understand the models that are in place, to potentially set restraints and constraints around how you use that model. And so that's an activity that I worked in within BP, and that's exactly what we did. So we primarily focused on derivatives and options-based models that were used within the organization. So again, BP would have hedged a lot of its positions, whether it's using forward contracts or options contracts. So again, a lot of those positions needed models. Also, BP would have had physical assets like oil and gas storage facilities, and those generally need to be valued using models because there's no market that would price these things for you. So again, there's actually a lot of model usage and a lot of model risk that's used within BP and other oil and gas operations. And again, we would have had to take these mathematical models, benchmark those, test those models, and again, set constraints around how we're going to use them. So that's effectively what we did. But with these models that we were working with, they're all kind of more or less tractable models. Okay, so there was some kind of a stochastic model. You could at least understand the mathematics that underlie them. Okay, and this is why, because of this interest, because of this kind of experience that I've had, that's what got me interested in terms of this move towards machine learning, which are black boxes inherently, and with deep learning, that black box is getting deeper and deeper in terms of its ability to explain what's happening. And so this kind of fascinated me, given this experience that I've had. But what's that mean when we now start to deploy and use AI systems? Okay, now there's a big regulatory impetus to do this. Okay, so again, organizations won't necessarily do this off their own bat. So this is being driven by a regulatory imperative. And again, this is just some of the stuff that is coming from the Fed, OCC in the US, and from the Basel Committee. Okay, and you can see that you take back to 2000 for the model validation bulletin, 2011's supervisory guidance on model risk management. That was subsequent to the credit crisis, and we understood some of the issues there. But if I just bring it to some of that, so we all kind of understand the story and the history of the credit crisis and the resulting financial crisis that happened. And while there are a multitude of things that were at fault, one of the things that people talk about is the issue around models that were being used. So we had these kind of models that were being used to try and capture the risk of these really complex and engineered credit derivative structures that were being put together by the financial system. And when everything kind of blew up, when we look back, we saw that some of those models were far too simplistic, right? And they weren't being managed. And that issue around model risk was just not a priority for organizations, okay? And we generally find that, so anybody who works in risk will probably know this, you know, making money is more important than trying to manage risk around it, okay? And so for any organization, you know, you've got to have a very strong risk culture to ensure that risk can enable the money making and the money generation, and not, again, put whole financial systems in trouble. So again, this is an example of where we knew that there was issues with models. So I'm probably just going to highlight a few examples of where AI has kind of gone wrong. So with AI systems, for example, when COVID occurred, there was the FICO, so the credit scoring giant in the US. They were using AI systems, and when COVID occurred, when people were told to stay indoors, people obviously reverted from physical shopping to online shopping. Okay, and when that dramatic shift occurred, FICO AI systems started to flag all of these purchases, for example, okay, and could potentially have shut down people's ability to purchase during that period of time. Okay? So this shows you some of the dangers, because the AI system was trained on a period where people generally physically bought material and they used online to a lesser extent. Then COVID occurred and there was a complete reversal and an immediate reversal. And so the AI system wasn't able to handle it. So it definitely said there's fraudulent activity happening, even though these were all perfectly legitimate purchases, and it was driven by having to do this because of COVID. So it's kind of, again, an interesting example when AI systems can potentially go wrong for you. Again, if you look at from a regulatory point of view, this is interesting Financial Times article talked about some of the risks from this kind of regulatory perspective. Okay, and then there's also the issue around liability, which is also something that's really concerning people. Okay, so if an AI system makes a mistake, who's liable? Okay, so if you're a financial services firm and you call a third-party solution, are you responsible? Is the third party responsible? Or do you just say, well, actually, it's just the AI system and we don't really know what it is? So who's liable? So this, I think, is concentrated in minds. And again, with financial services, you have potential reputation risk, legal risk, then it really does concentrate in minds, as I said, and people want to start to look at this. This is a good article, though, and actually they explicitly talk about explainability. So this is why, again, explainability may start to become more and more important, because we have this imperative. Okay, so again, we've got the issues in terms of internal issues, you've got external issues in terms of regulators, you've got potentially external issues in terms of legal issues that may face these organizations. And so again, explainability isn't the full answer to any of those things, but explainability is part of the puzzle. Okay? So I want to talk to you a little bit more then around the explainability piece. And again, this is all quite high level, just to give you a sense, point you to some interesting kind of academic articles. But I think what I've given you so far is, I suppose, a kind of industry context as to why this topic of explainable AI is interesting. This is, again, an academic paper that I've just cited here, but I kind of like the graphic that they have here, which kind of represents the trade-off that we have between performance and explainability. Right? And you can see here, for anyone who's familiar with machine learning models, you will see some kind of key models that I mentioned here. If you don't recognize some acronyms, you can switch the paper and have a quick look at that. But effectively, what we have is we have a plot here which shows you that as the performance basically comes down, the explainability goes up. So we have this inverse relationship between performance and explainability. Okay, and again, on the very top, you can see deep learning. So as I said, deep learning is definitely very powerful, definitely giving amazing performance improvements. Big problem is pretty dismal in terms of explainability. Okay? And again, like any trade-off, like risk return, any trade-off you do, there's no perfect answer, but there is just a balance. Okay? Just got to get that balance right between explainability and performance. And again, it goes back to my starting point, which is it really depends on what you're doing. Okay, so again, if I'm trading, I want performance and I want explainability as well. So again, it's a really tricky one to try and balance. But again, depending on what the application is, you may be happy with a particular trade-off between those two. So that's the thing, okay? Now I'll touch on some of these techniques fairly quickly, just to give you a sense of some of the techniques that are out there, and then to close, I'm conscious I'm already 35 minutes, but to close, I'll talk about some of our research and a particular research study which I'm doing with a colleague at the moment, which is to apply some of these explainable AI techniques. Okay, so this is kind of a cheat sheet which has been prepared by this company called Strathclyde, and there's a accompanying video if you want to have a look at it too. Again, I'm not endorsing any companies that I mentioned here, by the way, it's just that they have some interesting things for you to look at. But this kind of brings you to at a high level the kind of decision making that you might follow when you think about explainable AI. Okay, so first, I suppose the thing would be: are you trying to look for explainability? So in some cases, you're not. You're just looking to explore, okay, a particular model, and it might be just intrinsic to that model that you want to explore. So actually, explaining the model may not be of particular interest. But if it is, then one question that you have to ask is the model interpretable by design? Okay. So in some cases, that is the case. You can see that if it is, well, then it's pretty straightforward. So, logistic regression, linear models, so classical linear regression, and so on. Okay, KNNs, kind of nearest neighbor methods, they're inherently interpretable. Okay, so you can interpret those just by the way in which they're designed. But again, the issue that we had is that trade-off that some of those, while explainable, are again not as well in terms of don't perform as well. Okay, if it's not interpretable by design, then the question is, okay, well, if we're going to use these more sophisticated machine learning approaches, what can we do? Okay, and broadly speaking, there are two main categories. Okay, so do you need a method that works on all the models, or do you need a method that is just specific to the model question? Okay, so if it is a yes to that question, then you can use what are called model agnostic techniques. Okay, so this can apply to any type of model, and these are the ones that I'm kind of quite interested in personally at the moment, and we're doing some work here, which I'll mention towards the end of the talk. If not, then if it's not about a kind of suite of models as such, or you don't need something which is again model agnostic, and there are kind of model specific approaches. So it does again, it just depends on the application. Okay, and again, there's various kind of approaches that again have their own kind of details and specifics in terms of how those actually work. Okay. Okay, so that's at a high level what you need to do. So again, one question is it interpretable by design? Yes or no? Okay, and if it's not interpretable by design, what type of approach do you need to take? So this model agnostic or model specific approach. Okay. Now again, I'll touch on some of these approaches, but again, they're all quite technical. So again, it's not a technical talk, but it's to hopefully pique some interest in terms of things. Okay, so I'm going to skip the video. Okay, but it's a video that accompanies that slide and gives you a little bit more information and some examples actually of some of those techniques. Okay, so in terms of the broad category of explanations, okay, there's really kind of four main approaches to explainable AI. First is the local post hoc. Okay, this is where additional operations are required to explain a single prediction. Okay, so when you say local, it's a single prediction that you're trying to predict. Okay, there are global post hoc, where additional operations are required to explain the entire predictive process. Okay. Now, I'm much more interested actually myself in those kind of global post hoc approaches. Okay, and then in terms of self-explaining approaches, there's again local and global. So if you have a local self-explaining approach, that's where the predictive model provides the explanation of a single prediction. So it's the model that itself is inherently designed to give the explanation. Does that make sense? So it doesn't need further operations. The model will actually do that itself. And then there's global self-explaining. That's where the predictive model provides the explanation of the entire predictive process. And obviously that's quite a strong position to be in from an explainability point of view, but again, not always applicable. Okay. So this is where we're kind of at. Really, a lot of focus is around post hoc approaches. Okay. because we are using these kind of black boxes, these machine learning black box approaches. And then post hoc, okay, so after the event, we're trying to somehow derive some explainability from what actually happened. Okay, so broadly speaking, that's what we're looking to do. Okay, another paper I just pointed to, again, if you're interested in, particularly if you're quite technical, you might be interested in this academic study, and there's a number of them out there. There's a number of survey papers that look at explainable AI. Okay, but this is one I quite liked for the reason that it kind of gives you this schematic of the different approaches. Okay, so again, you can see, you can't read this obviously, but the point of showing this is that there is quite a layered approach here, and there's different branches that you can take depending on the type of explainability that you're trying to pursue. Okay, it also highlights just how kind of complex this area in itself has all got, and again, there's further work to be done in this space. So again, I won't bear too much on this. I'll probably skip the self-explaining methodology approach or modeling approach. Okay, but effectively, we're looking at intrinsic explainability and ad hoc explainability. Intrinsic, again, are those that we mentioned that are designed to be explainable, so like linear models and tree models. Ad hoc explainability, things where you basically try to bring the two together. So maybe bring together an explainable model and a machine learning model, try and get the best of both worlds in some way. Okay, and that could be a hybrid approach, it could be a joint prediction and explanation approach, and there's others as well. And then for the global post hoc explainability, again, the area that I'm kind of interested in at the moment is the model agnostic approaches. And there's different approaches there, like perturbation-based approaches, which really just seem more like a sensitivity or scenario analysis type of work that you would do around a machine learning model. Visualizations, which are quite useful. I'll show you some of those in a moment. Global surrogate models is quite an interesting approach where you take complex machine learning model, try to proxy it with some kind of surrogate, which is much easier to explain. And if you can get to two to deliver very similar results, and then you obviously have some level of explanation that you can point to. And again, there's other approaches which are more deep learning specific. So as I said, this is a new space really for me as well. So I'm beginning to, this is why I'm connecting it today, is that it's a new space. It's opened up a lot of kind of research opportunities, and from that then translation research opportunities to plug into business. But there's a lot to explore, okay, from here. And so for that reason, it's probably just worth jumping to a few things. So yeah, just for the last, say, 5-10 minutes, just to close out the talk, we'll talk a little bit around what the business might need to consider in relation to explainable AI. And then I'll point you to some of the research that we're specifically doing at the University of Strathclyde and looking to build further at the University of Strathclyde. So I suppose the thing is, I've given some context as to why explainability might be important. Okay? But I said that may be driven by internal considerations, particularly governance considerations for the organization. It'll partly be driven by these external forces, so regulators and supervisors putting pressure on to control these types of systems and their usage within the organization. And other kind of influences that may be driving this, but also I think just some technological developments. So, again, these explainable AI approaches are being researched more, techniques are emerging more, and so the opportunity to apply these is more prominent now than it was before. And so from a business point of view, how can XAI benefit an organization? Well, it can go beyond just this pursuit of explainability. Okay, so one of the things is that it can actually to increase productivity. Okay, so one of the things with AI systems is that, and actually this is true of model usage generally, is that by the time you find out a model has degraded to the point that it's not working well, it's almost too late. It's always a retrospective thing. Okay, so monitoring model performance is really important, irrespective of whether you're talking about a machine learning model or not. So that type of monitoring and maintenance of AI systems is actually really, really important. So if explainability can enhance that, okay, it means basically you can then enhance your AI systems, and that should ultimately lead to increased productivity of the business. Okay. again, it depends on the application, okay? But it makes sense. So if you can monitor and maintain your AI systems and enhance them, they should perform better for you, and that should lead to increased productivity. So from a business perspective, that's very important. The other thing is that explainability can build trust and adoption. And I'll talk about some of the work that we're planning to do in that space in a moment. But that's really important. And this kind of makes sense. So any black box that's provided is always going to face this barrier. Okay, that we're all a bit concerned about its usage. Yeah, okay, it gives great performance, but why? Why does it give great performance? And if I don't understand that, I tend to not trust it. Okay, and this is true of organizations. Okay, because again, people drive organizations, so you have to build trust. Okay, and if you can build trust, then that leads to greater adoption. Later, greater adoption of your systems will feed back into the first point, which is around increased productivity. Okay, and who would be interested in trust? Well, customers, regulators, and the general public all going to be interested in that. Okay, so actually, explainability could be a way to break down adoption barriers for organizations. Okay, the other thing is that it may allow just new value-generating interventions to be made by the organization. Okay, so often the explanations that these techniques provide around predictions can often be more important than the actual predictions themselves or the accuracy of those predictions. Okay, because these insights again provide opportunities for business development, and this brings us on to business value. Okay, so ensuring that the AI provides business value is a key thing. So again, explanations can link your AI investment with the AI expected outcomes and value. Okay, so again, another kind of open question to some extent is what value this technological investment. That's actually difficult to measure. You think it should be pretty obvious, but actually, when you try to objectively measure the value of that technological investment for a business, it's a difficult one to do. Okay, and obviously, there's people who work in technical economics that apply a lot of these techniques to try and determine this, but it's not easy. But if explanations can better link the investment with the value that it brings, then that's a business incentive to invest in explainable AI. And then, of course, mitigating regulatory and other risks is the key thing. Okay, now, I suppose that was the one that I would have led with at the opening of this talk. Okay, is that you have these kind of regulatory requirements and other risks. So we talked about them already. There's general business risks that you face, and there's legal risks, which brings us back to the point of who is responsible and liable if an AI system fails. Okay, and then there's those kind of broader ethical risks as well. Okay, and again, for any company that's interested and serious about corporate social responsibility and so on, it's got to ensure that its AI systems aren't inherently biased. Okay, and that issue is we talk about responsible and ethical AI. Explainability, I think, has a role to play in terms of trying to achieve that. Okay, so from a business perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'll skip this slide for a moment because it's conscious of time. So again, how does an organization then change its culture maybe to try and drive explainability more? So from this McKinsey report, I should mention, so the points made here are from that McKinsey report that I mentioned, or that I had a slide for earlier. But they kind of point to some things that an organization should do, which is to establish an AI governance committee, okay, to guide AI development teams. So that's building standards for AI explainability, maybe establishing a risk taxonomy, having a very clear model development process, which is again part of the puzzle that I was involved in the VP in terms of the model risk management, and then having some kind of a position in terms of that explainability versus accuracy trade-off that we talked about. Okay? And obviously, the second thing is to invest in the right talent, okay, and invest in the research and innovation that's required around this as well. But talent is one of the key things. And obviously, as we build our research capacity at Strathclyde, we'll be looking to build, as a result, teaching capacity around that. Okay, so our new programs, I think, over time will integrate more and more this concept of explainable AI, certainly on the finance side, and again, those kind of concepts will start to feed into the programs like the NEC strategic thinking here at Barry. So again, all this kind of research is important. For that reason, that it informs teaching, okay, and that teaching can inform executive education, and that fills the skills development gap that exists. Okay, So just very quickly to finish, I've got a little bit over time, just by a few minutes, but I'll just keep going just for 2-3 more minutes, just to, again, outline some of the research that we're specifically looking to fund going forward, and that we started as well in Strathclyde. So one of the big kind of funding opportunities that we're hoping to find out sometime this week is funding for a Centre for Innovation in Financial Regulation. This will actually be a Glasgow City Region investment, which will involve FinTech Scotland, who I mentioned at the beginning, University of Strathclyde and University of Glasgow. And this will be kind of hopefully a world-leading, UK-leading and world-leading research centre that delivers impact for industry, specifically focused on FinTech applied for financial regulation. Okay? Now, there's a big remit there, I won't go into all of it, but in terms of the explainable AI component, what I'm kind of hoping to try within that, if we get funded, is this XI augmented RegTech approach. So looking to see how explainability can actually feed into more diligent compliance with financial regulations and so on. Within that, there's going to be a lot of obviously textual analysis. So we're looking at how we can apply explainable AI in a natural language processing domain, okay, whereby we can process textual sources, but hopefully provide explainability on top of that. And if you can do that, then that's obviously going to drive your compliance service. You can be more transparent in your financial compliance, financial regulation compliance. Okay, and again, we see some of the integrated audio and textual analysis work being fed into that. So that's one project that's kind of ongoing. Hopefully, we'll be able to announce something positive in the next few days on that, if we get funded. Another funding application that we've made, which we hope to hear about fairly soon as well, is a call that was made through UPRI. So UPRI is the research and innovation body within the United Kingdom. So they had a call for the establishment of an innovation adoption accelerator. This is quite interesting because I think people are familiar with innovation accelerator generally. This is specifically focused though around adoption. Okay, and what they articulated in that call is that there are certain barriers to innovation adoption. One of those, well, there's many barriers, but one of those is again this kind of trust issue. Okay, so we put together a proposal. This is with University of Strathclyde and a number of university partners across the United Kingdom for development of an innovation adoption accelerator for professional accounting legal services that is explainable, transparent, trustworthy, and ethical. Okay, so we call it PALET, and within this, we're kind of framing our project around trying to provide an accelerator program which allows companies to increase their current robotic process automation activities, move them towards intelligent automation, which is AI augmented RPA, and to move them further again into what we have coined explainable intelligent automation. So if we had AI augmented RPA, we had explainable AI augmented RPA. And again, what that would do is it would allow these types of professional and legal services firms, so accountancy and legal firms, to increase their adoption of automation by breaking down barriers. And explainability is one of the key things that we're going to look at as part of that trust barrier. How do we break down that trust? And explainability is certainly has a role to play there. And again, if we do get funded and this project gets off the ground, we will be engaging closely with professionals on that. Okay. In terms of the PhD scholarship award that myself and my colleague James Bowden from Strathclyde recently got awarded, this will fund a PhD student to look at transparent textual audio analysis via XAI and natural language processing for improved ESG and impact measurement. So environmental and social governance is a big hot topic at the moment. And one of the issues with ESG is that it's very difficult to measure. Okay. And we know that the scoring agencies that are out there that provide these scores, a lot of those rating agencies have big discrepancies in terms of how they score different companies. So this all comes down to partly how they determine scores, but also there's an issue around the opaqueness of how they actually do that as well. So our approach is to build a transparent approach, and explainable AI will allow us to be as transparent as possible in terms of how we might measure ESG for our companies, for example. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting project. This has been funded, so we will get a PhD student from October of this year to work on this project. And again, hopefully there'll be some interesting research that will emerge from that, which has again practical research opportunities. And just the last paper I just want to mention quickly is one that we are currently working on. So this is myself and a colleague at Queen's University of Belfast. And we're looking at explainable AI being applied for monitoring model degradation in the oil options market. So I mentioned at the beginning, my background is in derivatives markets and options pricing specifically. So here we're looking at how you can use explainable AI to understand what might be driving mispricings within this market. Okay? So we have a theoretical model, which is you're using to price actual options traded, and at different stages, these models may deviate from what we see in practice. Okay, so the idea is to try and understand how these models are performing, and to use the explainable AI to understand when they degrade. Okay, and why would you want to know that? Because you may want to switch the model that you're using. Okay, and some of what we're looking to do is basically we will take a model, we will calibrate it to the options data. We will take those calibrated parameters, or just a time series of those, and we will try and feed those in as inputs to predict errors the following day, or at least to predict the likelihood of large errors the following day. Okay, so it's basically using model parameters estimated, okay, as a feed in to predict the likelihood of errors the next day. Okay, and what we're trying to understand is are there particular models within model specification that tell us or inform us more about that likelihood of these big mispricing errors the following day. And here we can generate some very, very interesting visuals. Again, we don't have time to go through it now, but there's some really interesting graphics that can tell you things like the importance of particular variables of interest, okay, or in this case, model parameters of interest. Plots that can tell you kind of what that sensitivity is based on the level of the parameter itself. And then this final plot tells you about interactions between the different variables within the model. Again, these are all opportunities to explain the dynamics of these quite complex models in ways that really we couldn't have kind of. Okay. So again, there's a lot of detail that I haven't covered, but it is really kind of interesting work. So that brings me to the end of the talk. Okay, so hopefully you've got a good sense of, again, what explainable AI is about, why it might be important for an organization, how an organization might actually go about trying to bring explainability into its AI system deployment, and hopefully get some sense of some of the kind of interesting research that we're looking to do in Strathclyde. And again, be very happy at this stage to open the floor to questions from the audience. There's quite a lot that was covered there, but very happy to take any questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Everybody can hear me? Yes. Do I need the mic? Hopefully not. You should not. Okay. So if anybody needs any question, we'll just raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you. Anybody has any questions? If there are no questions, that means one of two things: that you understood everything, or you didn't understand a whole lot. And if you didn't understand a whole lot, that's perfectly fine, because the field is rather new, and the idea was not to deep dive into it, but just to have your mind on that direction with these terms, because as Mark mentioned, this is a rather newer field. It's rather new. It's things that are coming in, and it can take time for us to, in this region, to be able to adopt and get to it. But to plant that seed about explainable AI for you to do, and hopefully do your own research as you go further along with it as well. Jeff, if you have a question, please go ahead.
This explain, I can say this.
Yes, go ahead.
That's fine.
Regarding that regulatory requirements, tools, any kind of tools, example for that helping through this artificial intelligence.
So from a regulatory point of view?
Yeah, regulatory reporting point of view.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's an advantage for the institutions. So, what is the example? Any of the example you can?
Like in terms of explainable AI from a regulatory compliance perspective, I probably need to look into specific examples. But what I would say is that there's definitely the area of regulatory technology. So we know that there's been a lot of developments in terms of how technology can create efficiencies for companies to comply with their financial regulation requirements. So in terms of the regulatory technology space, AI systems are used within those kind of solutions. But again, the issue with some of those is that they are black boxes. So there are opportunities, I think, in terms of the regulatory technology space where explainable AI can be used. Can't think of an example offhand in terms of where it might be used, but a lot of these are quite new, so they're not really being used in industry at the moment. Yeah, so it's developing and it's going to get there, but not quite there yet. Yeah. But I think in the regulatory technology space, there's a lot of opportunities to deploy explainable AI. Yeah.
What are the opportunities to learn more? How do we?
Yeah, like in terms of the progression, I suppose it depends a little bit in terms of what you're looking to do. If you're a technical machine learning person, I think there's loads of literature out there. There's a lot of very interesting survey papers that are a very good starting point. So I pointed you to one or two of those here in the slides. But if you just search online, you'll find lots of different survey papers that will bring you to a lot of the technical features of these explainable AI approaches. So I would definitely start there. And that's really where I'm at as well. So I'm kind of, like I said, went to start my journey with explainable AI. And so I'm using those to kind of understand the needs. And really what we're doing now with the research is trying to get the hand started, apply them and see how they work. So that last paper that I mentioned is really interesting because it's thrown up some really interesting insights that we weren't expecting to necessarily see from the outset. And so I think from a technical point of view, that's the starting point. In terms of the broader discussion around explainable AI as an opportunity for business, I think there's a lot of interesting reports. So again, I've cited some of them already, and McKinsey have done a number of different interesting reports that talk about these business opportunities. But if you look at all the kind of big professional firms, PwC, Deloitte, they all have various reports that talk about explainable AI and talk about those kind of business opportunities. And this is why the program in strategic fintech is interesting because these are actually strategic decisions. And like the technical people, the data scientists, they'll manage the technical piece. The strategic decisions around fintech, and that would be made by, again, the business managers, the C-suite who are managing these organizations. And so there's an interesting dynamics with the kind of technical things you think about, and then the strategic business decisions that need to be made around this as well. But I think my own view is that we're going this direction. AI has to move in this direction for it to be kind of sustainable going forward. Because there's just going to be more and more pressure for that kind of explainability and governance of your AI systems.
Major factor here is the trust, right?
Yeah.
The trust is something which will go over time that will be formed, I think.
Yeah.
Like one common example would be ChatGPT and all these things.
Absolutely, which is creating havoc for universities, for example. But yeah, so trust is a big issue. So I mentioned that funded project we call it Palette. So one of the teams we're going to look at is the trust barrier. So trust is definitely one of the big issues, not just for AI. I think it's for digital innovation generally. That any type of digital innovation where there's uncertainty around it, or people don't have full explainability, then people find it difficult to trust. And so yeah, that's a big piece of it.
More than the trust, I think it can be used for business rather than regulatory.
Yeah.
It can be for some insurance, banking, and other things.
Yeah.
Just to find out what are the opportunities. So there is no need to explain it.
Yeah, well,
regulatory requirement, you need to explain. But when there is, just to find out. But I don't think it's going to be difficult. You want to explain the AI.
Oh no, it's absolutely going to be difficult. Yeah, no, that's the real challenge. That's why so much work being put into this space. I think again, like there will be, again, depends on your organization, but you will have ultimately, I think, stronger regulatory impetus to explain. Because if you look at the EU, for example, they're building an AI governance framework. So if you operate AI systems within the EU, probably in 5-10 years, explainability is just simply going to be part of what you have to do, and that's tricky. But I think what's interesting with the McKinsey report, I think, is while explainability is important for decisions that a system might make, I think the point they make here is actually the explainability might actually give you new business ideas. Exactly. So new business ideas, new business opportunities that you might not have realized without that explainability. So it's interesting. This is where I suppose the strategic piece comes in, is that if a business can see that explainability is not just the compliance ticking of the box, but actually it's a business opportunity or it's insights into a business opportunity, I think that could change the landscape of it as well. So it goes beyond then trust, it becomes just a strategic thing that people use to drive value in the organization.
Okay, my voice is, I think, quite strong. In the AI stock markets, for instance, all market stock markets, now the portfolio managers are using AI, but they're not necessarily XAI. So how they going to prevent this in the future? Because it's going to it's going to spread over, and it's moving very fast. I mean, this has to be into the picture soon enough, I suppose. Otherwise,
exactly.
Control.
Exactly. And it may not be possible to just reverse engineer explainability into these systems.
How are you going to reverse engineer this into this already existing system?
It's a really good question. Like I know it has been, again, it's been looked at from, say, the EU perspective with the AI governance framework that's been worked on, and the US is looking at it, the Federal Reserve is very much on top of it. But the problem I think that we always find with these innovations is that innovation outpaces regulation. And so there's always like a catch-up being done. But it's really a good point that there are a lot of AI-based systems that are trading currently. So we talked about algorithmic trading, and they're using them. But it needs to happen quick, but it has to come from, I think, it has to come from regulation and the regulators.
There's a question from one of our people attending online, and Arti asks, they know how much AI has been helping in corporate finance. However, how should we predict, or how do we see the future outcome of artificial intelligence in the overall financial sector?
So can you repeat that in terms of your corporate finance, please?
The question is, I know how much AI has been helping in corporate finance. However, how should we predict, or how do you see the future outcome of artificial intelligence in the financial overall sector?
Yeah, because I mean, it certainly is having an impact on corporate finance, but I think it's well beyond corporate finance. I think AI is something that is penetrating every single aspect of financial services currently. So again, if you look at the OECD report that I mentioned, they've outlined a number of different areas where AI is currently being used. When you talk about corporate finance, I mean, that could be corporations themselves in terms of their usage of AI. It also could be the investment firms who are investing in these companies in terms of setting capital requirements and so on. So it also depends a little bit in terms of the side they're coming from. But I still maintain that explainability, I think, is where the AI is going to go. I think for the reason that we've talked about, I think this is where it has to go because it's going to be driven by regulations. But it will depend on the, I think, back to the point, it depends on the application. And it depends on the imperative to have explainability. And not every application needs deep explainability. Some applications may not need explainability at all. But I think there are too many situations where explainability is needed that this is why it's going to happen. Okay? Because the materiality is where the explainability is needed, and that's what's going to drive it. And there's a systemic issue, which I think is what you're getting at. It's actually, there could be a systemic issue here. And we saw this, and it's not that like we haven't been there before. So the credit crisis was driven by a lot of things, but it was definitely driven by poor modeling practices within these organizations. And I feel like we're almost sleepwalking into the next crisis. And if there is a crisis at some point, people will look back and go, well, why did we let AI systems kind of proliferate without controlling them properly? Explainability offers an opportunity to do that.
Last question, if there is any.
Questions?
Yeah,
Quick ones.
We're doing a lot of research on a daily basis. That means students, we will have our machine learning data analysis models, but at the same time, we cross-check our ChatGPT with the help of our professors. And my project that I'll be doing in about a month's time is that, and with reference to that, this was the same question I'm going to pose to you. Last week, I asked the the CEO of the American University, which I will be having a meeting probably very soon.
Yeah.
ROI on the degree programs of the universities that they are presenting now, which is 4 years of time and money, has been reduced to almost zero after ChatGPT.
Right.
Yes, and probably the education sector, if it doesn't come up, if it doesn't improvise very robustly, then I think universities are turning into museums very soon.
Yeah, I hope that's not the case, but
This is well, but these are the things that we are discussing in our classrooms right now.
yeah, yeah.
The amount of projects are coming, students are coming up with these projects. So the whole thing is, where do you see as a university? Do you have any sort of an overview or insight that you are want to improvise very soon on if the student bodies, the student populations of countries start asking the questions that, what is the ROI? Should we be opting for a bachelor degrees 4 years?
Yeah.
That's one thing. Second, you probably mentioned in the start of your talk that you'll be looking for collaborations. So you'll be looking for collaborations for in the Middle East also, and then oil and gas. You come from BP. I also have a background from BP as well. So.
Yeah.
So that was the second question.
Okay, that's the easier one from the start. So in terms of the outreach, say in terms of the fintech cluster, which I mentioned, and the university more broadly, absolutely. So we have a reach obviously across Scotland, the United Kingdom, but we also have a global reach in terms of who we'd like to work with and what we'd like to work on. So I think if there's obviously anybody in the room who's interested in talking to myself on that score, either in terms of the fintech cluster or any of the clusters that I mentioned at the university level, please do go up and chat. And, if I'm not the right person to answer the question or connect you, then I can get you connected to the right people in the university, and hopefully we'll still be around to make sure that we complete these projects as and when we start them. So go back to the first question then. Yeah, like ChatGPT is an interesting one. It's obviously raising a lot of eyebrows, I think, for everybody, but particularly for the university sector. I think there's a valid question certainly in terms of how we assess students, okay? Because it is so easy now to get ChatGPT to create, kind of answers to assessments. So we have to think very innovatively about how we actually assess our students. But I think you're right. We certainly have to ask questions in terms of what we now can bring to the table. Now, I still would hope that with ChatGPT, as good as it is, it can't conduct research and innovation, right?
But the PhD level is not research. It's
no, but the university is about universities are about research and innovation, and I think that's where the value lies. Okay, and educational programs that we develop, I think the way in which we develop programs now, the way in which we deliver programs has changed a lot. We're much more agile. I think Strathclyde has always been agile, but all universities are becoming much more agile in how to do that. And if you have programs which are driven and informed by research and innovation, I think then you have something which is just not replicatable. If you're doing static deliveries of things, yeah. But if you're cutting edge, I think that's where it has to be. And ChatGPT, it can't do research rate. And in fact, even when you test it about, say, writing research papers, colleagues in Dublin, for example, who wrote a very interesting paper that got featured on the Financial Times. So Michael Dowden and Brian Lucy, you just check out their work. They actually got ChatGPT to write a finance research article up to the point of doing the empirical analysis. Okay, so the paper didn't do any empirical analysis, and then they got the paper without that peer reviewed. And most of the people who peer reviewed the paper said that it would be publishable at quite a decent level in terms of academic journal. So it did a very good job on that. But the thing it couldn't do was the empirical analysis. So it couldn't add value, it couldn't increment knowledge in something. But it could get you to that point, which is very interesting. But yeah, so so I think probably for me, I think it's still the research and innovation piece. That's what's going to keep hopefully universities alive, and we won't become museum pieces. But I think the programs have to reflect that, because otherwise, as you said, the ROI does come down.
As you said, the employability will be lost, right? Like now we can see the recent Google and Amazon all are lost their jobs.
Yeah, a lot of people lost jobs. Yeah, and there's a big open debate in terms of, say, like if you take automation and digital innovation generally, there is this open debate about is it going to destroy jobs or create jobs. You know, I don't research that space, so I can't necessarily comment, but I know that there's certain conflicting evidence and conflicting views around that. So there's definitely a school of kind of research that has pointed to increasing and developing new types of jobs, and then other research which points to a decimation in terms of workforce employment. So I'm not sure, I can't comment too much on that, but that's definitely an issue, which is broader than ChatGPT. It's a broader issue of digital innovation.
Even the investments also, for the artificial intelligence, investment value will be very high.
The investment value will be high, yeah. I mean, it could be high, yeah. But as I said earlier, actually tying the investment to the value is a tricky thing. But if we can measure that pretty well, then we should see high value to the investment. But again, if it's just at the cost of everybody's jobs, then that's not a future any of us want to consider. So I think that's why, again, it's more, it should be more about how digital technology can develop new value, create new opportunities, and new workforce
That should be the way
opportunities.
forward.
Should be, yeah. Whether it will or not, we'll see. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting topic to talk about.
It's going to be very scary.
Sorry, say that again?
The future is going to be very scary.
Could be, it could be, yeah. So people fear AI, which go back to trust. This is why AI is such a.
There's no more oldest board.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so any other questions before I hand over to
The investment and
Yeah.
finance professionals to learn this. Is it any IT? Can be basically people.
Yeah.
And technical, additional technical specialists.
Well, I mean, there's obviously lots of different programs out there that will that will bring people through that journey in terms of machine learning and broader data analytics. I haven't seen any specific programs around explainable AI, but I think if you look at kind of more advanced topics within some of these programs, you know, those that are kind of at the cutting edge will be bringing explainable AI content into this program. So I think again, as the requirement for that skill set increases, and if you go back to the McKinsey report, they talked about the need to develop that talent, to build a talent strategy, and to do that, part of that is going to be the development of programs that are at that cutting edge. And so certainly in Strathclyde, that's something that we're certainly looking at. But unfortunately, at the moment, it's just hard graft, looking at you know the kind of heavy technical data science type work to kind of get yourself up to speed, and then hopefully as time moves on, we see many more applications of these techniques for finance, but also other business areas. Because it's not just a finance problem; it is a business application.
You said that you were going for a video or something?
Yeah, well, there's a video on the link, so I think the slides I presume will go out afterwards. Again, so there's a link to the video. The video is linked to that sheet that I had there from a particular company, I think it was called. So yeah, you can check the video out. Yeah, well, I think the slides will be emailed out. Yeah. So within the embedded slides, you'll be able to check the video. Yeah. Or we'll add a link to it. Okay. Well, listen, I'd like to thank everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the session today. We have tea and coffee served outside. If you still have any further questions, Mark will be around.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a lovely evening.
That's great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mother. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Yes.
Tanıştırayım Emir'in babası şimdi. Yapayım mı? Ha? Söyleyeyim mi?
Keep my job for notes, the interviews.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So, how are you going? What can I check? Shall I contact